Hello, welcome back to 3 Delirium. My name is AJ, and today will be the last. Hello, welcome back to 3 Delirium. My name is AJ, and Happy New Year! Welcome back to the last video of 2020. And to celebrate the new year and try to take the lessons learned in this previous year to help better ourselves for the future, I thought it was finally time for a YouTube rite of passage. What better way than with a top 10 video? Alright, so let's look at the top 10 lessons I learned in 3D printing in 2020. Number 1. First up, we have probably the first lesson I learned when starting to 3D print back in October. There is a setting on the Prusa slicer. Since I have a Prusa machine, I am kind of relegated to using their slicing software, which is very okay. It's pretty good software on its own. But there are settings to define how detailed I want my model to be, how fine I want the layer height. And I mentioned in a previous video about the layers upon layers that stack on top of each other and some of the issues that can arise there. So whenever you tell the printer to print a finer layer height, since each layer is thinner, that also means that the print head on the printer has to be lower down and closer to the surface of the model that you are printing. Well, sometimes that means that the finer the model you make, the more likely it is to fail. So if the print head little needle nozzle is closer to the model, maybe if even the slightest bit of edge sticks up on your print, you can far more easily grab that edge and tear it off, ruining everything. But likewise, even when everything goes completely according to plan, sometimes a lot of support material on a model will cause some really rough edges, especially on the bottom surface that the print material will be sticking to. So even though this model was made originally with some amazing detail, this is actually a free model from a pretty good modeling company called Artel W miniatures. They released a bunch of their models that are going out of production. They released the files for them online, and I finally was able to print one each piece at a time, like the model originally came in the file itself, like one arm, his hammer, a little torso, his feet, all separately. The printing of the support material caused some really rough edges. So you might have one edge of the model looks pristine and perfect, just turning it 90 degrees or right around. You can see the imperfections that come and look very much not perfect. So I think this is an example that I need to lower my expectations when making miniatures, specifically with this style of printer. This is known as a FDM, or forced film something. The filament is pushed down and it comes out like this, compared to a resin, which is much more detailed. But I can get into that later. Number 2. This is a spaceship. I'm going to call it a big spaceship because it is bigger than the other ones that I've made, attempting to use the same scale. Now, this model here, just like previously, I'm sure I'll bring this model up again later in this video because I learned a lot from just printing this one model. But what I'm trying to mention here right now is failures on the printing failures come in all shapes and sizes. So this model is done. It's completed. The whole ship, and again, looking at it from one direction, it looks perfect. But flip it over, and right here along the front, it seems like maybe it got too warm in one spot or something. What should be a nice round cylinder has like flexed inward and made like a very organic kind of rough looking shape that was meant to be super smooth and spaceship-like. But technically the ship is done in its entirety. It's usable for the purposes I was going to use it for. But now I have a model that is sub to the standard that I was hoping to get. So do I print a new one, fixing the problem that I made? Now I have 2 ships, but I don't need 2 ships, I only needed 1. It's one of the great mysteries of 3D printing. When you make something, now it exists. Number 3. So, what did I mean by that? Once it's made, now it exists. Well, do I throw away all failures? Kind of wasting material and wasting time, which is sometimes more valuable than anything else when it comes to 3D printing, because everything could potentially just take so long. Well, for example, I have this pack mule that I made for fantasy roleplay gaming. His legs didn't form quite as they should, but his front did. So everything looks fine except his back legs. Do I throw all of this away? Do I throw away 50 cents worth of filament? But do I throw away 4 hours of attempting to print? It's a tough choice. Same thing comes when everything goes perfect, according to plan and everything. Here's the spaceship from the show The Mandalorian. I watched an episode or 2 and thought, man, his ship is really cool. I want to print one of them. But it worked exactly as I wanted. I needed to print in 2 pieces. All it's going to take is gluing it together like this. So I could spray paint it silver and it'll look just like the one in the show. And now what? So now I have a toy, which I'm super happy about, and it makes me happy to have one. And now it'll sit on a shelf and look good. So I have to keep in mind when I want to print something or when don't I want to print something. Is it for satisfying a craving? I just want to have something from The Mandalorian. Or is it for practical purpose? Now, saying that, I'm going to mention these ogres here later on as well. These are the most recent thing that I've printed. These yellow ogres. I'm currently in a role-play campaign with a friend of mine, and we had word that some ogres will be the enemies coming up soon. So I wanted to make sure I print out some ogres just so we can use them on the tabletop with minis and heroes that we made as well. But I can guarantee that this game is not going to last forever, and what happens with these once we're done using them in the game? They'll sit on a shelf and I'll have ogres and they'll look like this. Now what? A big complication when it comes to 3D printing. I mentioned before that mistakes come in all shapes and sizes. Well, we'll be talking about this later on as well, but I had exactly the same mini printed perfectly every time. This is much smaller than I wanted. This is still kind of smaller than I wanted, but usable. Do I throw them both away because I don't need them? Would that be wasteful? All things to think about. 4. I may have mentioned it before. Anytime you hear anything about 3D printing, the word prototyping is thrown around quite a bit. Prototyping as in you have an idea, make it into fruition, and then you can see how good that idea is or isn't, and then you can make another one with the improvements afterwards. But, like I just mentioned, you're left with the prototype. The prototype still exists. Well, what do you do with it? It sits on a shelf or sits in a box while you throw it away. It's a hard lesson to learn, but prototyping can be avoided if you try to make the one you want to start with. So I have these ships that I actually designed myself. They are, I took an image from a different roleplay game that I'm currently playing, and I designed these in Tinkercad. You might notice that the first one I printed off here, I did quickly. I just wanted something to put on the table and move around and have fun with it. And then I wanted to paint it as well to look like the one from the game. And since I didn't use a very fine layer height, it looks real choppy and messy, and there's actually quite a bit of mistakes on the bottom. Again, I mentioned it with the big guy with the hammer. The bottom doesn't always turn out as well as the top does. So it can be better, could be better. I even changed some of the dimensions and printed it out again with a finer detail, and it looks much better. And I even finished painting this one and added a base. So this plane here still exists. If I'd have just made it right the first time, I wouldn't have to deal with a prototype. Especially since I'm not using this for making anything super practical, or it's not a part for my car or a piece to fix something broken in the house. I could have probably just stuck with the prototype as well. You just move it around the table and it looks okay. This one looks better. Which do I use? Which do I throw away? Which do I keep? The fifth one. So one of the major excuses I was telling myself to reason for getting a 3D printer is that I could print my own minis and paint them and use them with the games that I enjoy playing. It didn't take very long for me to realize that that might not always work as well as I would hope. So I have a standard, the baseline for what I can make all my judgments from. This is a model that I did not print myself, but I did paint it, and I'm quite proud of this model. It's a very basic troop from the game Warhammer Age of Sigmar. So we have a little knight with a shield and a mace. This is what I enjoy painting, and this is what I would come to expect my standard of painting to be. So some of these are prints that I've made recently, some of them are prints that are older, but I am constantly learning the same lesson from this. So for my most recent roleplay game that I have currently playing, I am playing as this guy. He's cast spells and he has a sword, and I printed him out, and just like before, I've noticed the front of his armor, or the top when printing, is a lot more detailed and it looks a lot better than the back. But I try to use a few little painting tricks and techniques to try to like cover that up a little bit, and it looks okay. The second one I printed off is this archer here, after my current character, and it's quite messy. It's a lot messier than the character that I'm playing as, but it works. Whenever I'm playing with them, I don't have my head down at the table level. I'm not looking at them from an inch away to see every single detail. I'm usually playing and rolling dice and more interacting with the other players in the game, rather than focusing on the detail of the miniatures, but at times it is noticeable. So here's a model, one of the models I printed out most recently. She has no paint on her, but still has some pretty good definition. Yes, like I mentioned again, the part that was facing down when printing is a little bit less refined, has a few more mistakes on it, but unpainted, this miniature looks perfectly fine as well. So if I just have unpainted minis that I'm using, it would work just as fine as well, which means it would behoove me to have more than one color of filament, something I tried to avoid at the beginning. Well, hello, this is Editing AJ from the future. While trying to put this video together, I realized that I have a lot to say about the things that I learned in 2020 in regards to 3D printing, so it looks like I'll have to split this video into two separate videos. So tune in next week to see the second half of my top 10s list of what I learned about 3D printing in 2020. But from all of us here at 3 Delirium to you in the new year, let's all hallucinate together about the possibilities of 3D printing. See you next year. Bye-bye.